Fear can feed our most selfish impulses and erode the bonds of community. And if we let it consume us, the consequences of that fear can be worse than any outward threat.
That was President Obama giving his final address at the annual National Prayer Breakfast. This just one day, of course, after making his first visit as president to an American mosque, where he sent a message of hope, but also telling Muslims that they too are American, and they're welcome here. Bringing it back in, Gina Loudon, Betsy Woodruff, and Vince Coglianese. Gina, you know, the theme this week from President Obama has certainly been that Muslims in America are under some form of siege, that there's widespread attack, hatred, anger toward them, and that Christians in this country probably should check themselves.
This is the creation of a crisis using terror incidents. This is turning the victims into the perpetrators. And this is all about creating a psychological environment that propagates this idea of this victimization and creates tribalism, which further divides our country. Also, another important point, I've studied a lot about the psychology of terror, Charles, and I think it's interesting that the #1 thing that is pervasive in the mind of terrorists when they commit crimes is this sense of alienation, victimization, and tribalism. And he's working on that.
And as a matter of fact, when we talk about radicalization or so-called self-radicalization, that's a key component in it. That's one of the things that sort of puts them on the road to start doing things like blowing up their coworkers. But Vince, yeah, the political rhetoric has been that, hey, you know what, maybe we'll keep all Muslims out, even if it's temporary. And a lot of people have seized on that as being un-American and certainly targeting millions, if not billions, of people who are maybe innocent.
Right, but I'd say that when you're in a prayer breakfast, it's a call for unity, and strangely, Obama seems to make these calls for unity while also sort of adding some more division to the process by making it seem like, again, that the Muslim community is the one that's being persecuted here. I want to call attention to something that he said in this speech. He made a comparison between two separate events that he said represented spiritual courage. The first event involved a World War II soldier, an American soldier, who was taken captive by the Nazis and who stood there in front of Nazi guards and protect Jews that were serving among him. He wasn't killed, and in that moment he said, "We are all Jews," and was not killed.
Right.
The other story he said was something to do with a Muslim American who was in Chicago the day after the San Bernardino shootings and was concerned about whether or not he could pray in public. He prayed in public. That, Obama said, was comparable. I don't understand how that is even close to a similar instance of spiritual courage as someone who stood up to the Nazis in World War II. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Betsy, what are your thoughts on it, Betsy?
I have trouble understanding how the president telling Muslim Americans that they count as Muslim Americans is somehow contributing to their alienation. I mean, in fact, I think this was doing quite the opposite. The United States has a history of having trouble in the past integrating certain immigrant groups, including Chicago, the president's hometown, which had a very dark time in the early part of the 20th century with Jewish immigrants. And look, FBI data from 2015 shows that there was a significant uptick in attacks on Muslim Americans because of their faith. So I think, if anything, if you're trying to combat radicalization, and if you're trying to make this country a place that's safe for all Americans regardless of faith, being welcoming to Muslims, encouraging them to participate in our society is great. There are 5,000 Muslims currently serving in the U.S. military. That's a good thing. These people should be welcomed, and alienating them could have very negative effects.
Although I think assimilation is certainly the responsibility of people who come to a new country and also respecting those cultures. And I got to tell you also, the lingering vision, the lingering symbols we're seeing out of Europe don't help.